Welcome everyone to the final project guide. We're going to start this video by looking at the logistics of what you'll turn in and when for your final project. And then we'll take a deep dive into the guidelines and even show some examples of what we're looking for. So we'll navigate from the home page of our website to the logistics tab. And you'll see here our course outline. We have 2 modules a week until weeks 5 and 6, and those are completely dedicated to your final project. So we'll have office hours that we encourage you to stop by to and show us any challenges, any progress that you're making with the projects. But we won't have any modules for you to go through those 2 weeks. Those are solely dedicated to your final project, and that will be due on midnight on May 5th. So midnight on May 5th is that due date. And what you'll be turning in is 2 things. So you'll be pushing your code. So the same way that you do in each of these modules, other than in course introduction and data storytelling. But for all these middle modules, the same way that you've been pushing code on GitHub, you'll push your final project. This will be a little bit different because it'll be a new R Markdown instead of an R Markdown that you edit. But I'll go over exactly how to create a new R Markdown and what that entails. And then the second thing you'll be turning in is a recorded video. So it'll be you going through a knitted R Markdown, similar to how all the videos on this website are put together with me and Victoria. And that will be going through your final project, all the code, the text to supplement, and your data figures that you show, all to tell one cohesive story. So it'll be 2 things to turn in: the code that you'll be pushing, and then a video. Videos are a little tricky. Sometimes the longer they are, the more size they take up. So I would recommend maybe trying to email it to me at connor.flynn@chaminade.edu. It might ask you to create it as a Google link, so that might take a few hours. So I would just account for that. But you can get it to me via email or via Google Drive link. And then from there, with your permission, we'd love to share them on the website, put them on our YouTube channel, because I think they'll be really great demonstrations on everything you've learned and how you've been able to be creative with the new art tools that you've learned in the course. So that's the general logistics. And now we'll go over to the final project guide tab. And here we are. So again, congrats, you've made it to the end of the course. So now it's time to jump into this final project. And again, this will be a screen recorded video of you going through a knitted RMD or R Markdown that tells a story with data visualizations. So I suggest that you use Zoom the same way that we've made these. And we'll show you exactly how to knit that R Markdown. But the most essential point that I want to emphasize here is just that you tell a story with data visualizations. So let's talk about what exactly that means. So there will be a minimum requirement of 4 data visualizations generated from either the SDR 2023 data.csv. So this is the CSV that we use throughout the course, all the way from intro to R to machine learning. That's the data set we use. Or you can use the SIDS or small island developing states SDR 2023 data CSV. And I'll show you exactly where that is and how to load that in. So I encourage you to, either use the SIDS one or use the one that we've been using for the whole course. That decision is totally up to you. And then we want to talk about context. So with those 4 data visualizations, there should be a minimum of 8 sentences describing and interpreting each of the visualizations. So this is where the story comes in. And here are just some questions to consider. You don't have to answer them directly like bullet point style, but just consider them in your answers and in your 8 sentences. So what is the variable or the variables shown? And why did you choose that variable? So out of all the SDG scores and normalized scores, the indicators, why did you choose this? And exactly what are they? So when we ask what are they, we want to be sure to describe the variables. So for example, you might explain that the variable normalized score SDG 7 electricity access is actually a normalized score of the percentage of the population with access to electricity. So we just want to be sure that we're not leaving the audience wondering what like elec-ac is there. And that's something that we could look at if you look at the course introduction, where we look at the column names in our data set and what they are relative to the actual long name that explains the variable. So again, yeah, not leaving the audience with something like this and explaining that this is a normalized score for the percentage of the population with access to electricity. That makes your story much clearer and much easier to understand. And then some more questions. So why did you choose to visualize the data in this way? So why did you pick a map versus a bar chart versus scatter plot versus a histogram, all those kind of things? So it'd be nice to tell the audience why you chose that style of visualization for what you want to show us. Which leads into the last bullet point of what does the visualization show us? So do we see trends? Do we see differences? How does it build your story that you're trying to share with these minimum of 4 data visualizations? So that'll be up to you on being creative and what you see in the data viz that you produce. And then next, we're talking about a narrative. So again, this cannot be a document of just 4 visualizations that don't tie into each other or make sense together. Supplemented by your written sentences, the visualization must tell a story, and a cohesive story that starts at a beginning and ends with something. So we want really to take the audience on a guide through our SDG narrative with figures, with text. We're asking you to do the video just to practice data science communication, but we're hoping that you write the text in a way that someone could just read the report and not watch the video and still understand your project. But the video help a lot by just adding your personality to it and your way of speaking that you can't quite cover sometimes with text. And then the last general guideline is that your code must be reproducible. So you need to be able to restart R, clear your environment with the broom icon that I'll show you, and then hit the knit button to produce a knitted R markdown, similar to those on the course website. And if there are any errors in your code, the knit button will actually prompt an error message instead of producing a document. So you won't be able to knit if your code is not reproducible. So it's a really good test. So those are the guidelines. And then now we'll talk about project suggestions. So again, we want you to be as creative as possible. And the projects are pretty open to whatever direction you want to take them, as long as, again, they have those minimums of 4 data viz that tell a story and 8 sentences, at least to support each data viz. But here are a few suggestions if you could use some guidance. If you're at the end of the course and you're not exactly sure where to go, we kind of have 2 examples here that I think are neat. One way of thinking about it would be focusing on a country and tell the story of that country within the SDG context. So giving a brief textual description, describing the country, right? What are some things outside of the SDGs that might make the SDGs more relevant? So I would start with just a very brief textual description describing the country. And then what is the country's overall SDG score, right? Relative to the rest of the world, where does your country fall? Make a plot of the 17 normalized SDG scores for that country. So we get to see all 17 scores and the differences, so we can see where that particular country is doing well and where challenges remain in the 17 SDGs. Highlight the SDG the country has the most success in, and again, the SDG where the largest challenges remain. And then think about the indicators in each of the SDGs and highlight maybe, yeah, again, the most success in a specific indicator versus the most challenges in an indicator. That might give us some insight into what's going on, again, in that country through the SDG lens. And then I think a neat question to ask if you go to the ML lesson, when we think about which cluster does the country fall into, so the country that you choose, which cluster does it fall into? We started with just 2 clusters, but that assignment had you building, so like doing 3 and 4 clusters. So that's just a good way to ask which countries is my country similar to based on the SDG scores. And then for scatter plots and linear regression, maybe you could do some statistics and plot your country, or you'd actually plot, sorry, all countries. So like we made in the stats lesson where we had a score or an indicator on the x-axis and a score or indicator on the y-axis, and then each country was a point. We made them interactive with ggplotly, if you remember using label equals country and then making it interactive with ggplotly for that assignment. You can hover over the points, right, and see. And a good question to ask there would be, does the country you choose follow the trend or is it an outlier? So for some of those plots that you make, is it following the trend? Is it close to the line? Or is it an outlier? Is it not following the trend? I think that's a really neat way to look at a country in the SDG context. And then try a few combinations of SDGs on the X and Y axes and see what happens. And how does the country compare to the other countries in its region? I think is a good question always to be thinking, even on the scatter plot. If you'd like to color by region, right? Where does your country fall compared to the rest of the countries in its region? And then another way, so that first bit, right, was focusing on a country and going down that route. And I gave you a bunch of example questions that you can answer with data viz. Then another way to look at it might be to focus on an SDG and tell the story of that SDG. So what is the global distribution of that SDG scores, right? So each country, so looking at maybe a histogram to look at the distribution of that SDG score. Visualize the SDG on a map, right? So if we're thinking about all the countries in the world, just visualizing that with leaflet and R might be a cool idea. Looking at what are the indicators in that SDG, being really kind of critical about thinking what are the indicators? Were they what you assumed would be the indicators for that SDG? How do they look, right? What are the distributions of individual indicator scores? I think that's a really neat way because the SDGs as a whole, sometimes I think the indicators might not be exactly what we expect to measure that SDG. So I'd be critical of them. I would measure them and show them with as much data viz as you can to really paint a good picture of how we're calculating that SDG and what we're actually measuring. And then what does the global trend look like for that SDG? So we didn't use a lot of the trend data, but we have it in our data frame. So I think that would be a neat thing to do that we haven't quite covered in any of the assignments or the lectures. I'm thinking about the trends. So positive, kind of upward trends, neutral trends, or downward trends. And what does it look like for that SDG? And what does it look like for individual indicators? And then lastly, I think it would be really neat to break some stuff out from the ML lesson and look at what are the strongest predictors of that SDG's normalized score. So that would be like random forests and machine learning. So if you put your SDG into that random forest model, and that's the variable that you're trying to predict, that SDG score, what are the biggest or most influential variables in making that prediction? And then you could also plug an indicator, one of the indicators within that SDG, into the random forest model and see what are the biggest influencers in predicting that indicator. So yeah, there's a ton you can do with ML if you're focusing on just one of the SDGs. So again, those are just two thoughts if you want to go that way. That's kind of the questions that we're asking and thinking. But again, we'd like you to take this project in any direction as long as you meet the minimum requirements. And now let's talk about some of the code that you're going to be writing. So let's think about the format of your R Markdown. So the first thing you need to do is to create a new R Markdown. And I think this is a good time to just jump into RStudio and show you how that's done. So creating a new R Markdown is something that you haven't done in the course yet, most likely. So what we're going to do is go up to this top left pane here, and we'll see a white page with a green plus. When we click that drop down, we'll have a few options. We'll have our script, which is just like a blank slate kind of. We'll have our notebook, and we'll be looking at our markdown. So our markdown is what we want to select there. And you'll give a title. So I'll just call this final project. But I encourage you to be maybe more creative in your final project title. I'll hit OK. And once I hit OK, this pops up in my console. So something that says Untitled 1, so I haven't saved this R Markdown as anything yet. I'm only giving it a title that shows up here. But we'll see, yeah, the title, my name, the date, and the output. And we'll see one code chunk that's preset here for us, and then some text talking about what an R Markdown is. Then even gives us some examples of how you can use R Markdown with code chunks. You write normal notes here. You can use hashtags for headings. And the really neat thing about R Markdown and why we're using it is because when you knit them, so remember, we're turning in a knitted R Markdown, and in our video, we're going through a knitted R Markdown. So this is really important for the final project. So when you knit, two things happen. It prompts you to save it. So again, I'll save this as final project. no spaces in our file name. I'll hit save. And then now, here we go. So this is what a knitted R markdown looks like. So it took some of the code in that document, that example code, and it just shows you how you can link things, how hashtags will equal big text like this, which I'll show you in just a sec as well, and how plots can be put into this nice PDF format. So this is how all the website lessons were made. So everything from intro to R, basic viz, advanced to ML was all made in this style of us writing code. And you could see all that code actually in your R project in the files down there. So this is what a knitted R Markdown looks like a nice PDF document that you can share with folks. So I'll show you a few tips and tricks of our Markdown. The first thing when you open it that you're going to want to do actually is delete everything from line 12 down, because that's just example code. So we don't need it, right? It's talking about cars, a pre-built-in data set in R, so we don't want that in our final project. So we will delete that, which leaves us with something that looks like this. And how you'll start, just since you haven't started R Markdown yet, I would do a few things. So I would say load in packages used in the analysis, and all our packages will go in this first code chunk, the library function. So we always use library tidyverse. We always use library here to cut out long file paths and read in data. Let's see, we always use library janitor, right, to clean the names of our columns. So that's a good 3 to start off with. If you use like leaflet or something, you might use library leaflet to make maps and that kind of thing. If you make plots interactive, right, you might be using library plotly. So just think about all of that and all the packages you might use in the analysis. And of course, as you're going down and you're thinking about your plots and you're adding code, if you use a new package, just go ahead and give yourself a new line up here and add it to the top of your script. So that's our first bit. We'll run that. Our libraries. And then the next thing you'll do is read in your data, right? So read in data. And remember, this is where you have the choice, right? So we'll start with just reading in our data that we've used the whole course, that SDR 2023 report. We'll open up a code chunk with Command Option I if you're on a Mac and Control Alt I if you're on a PC. We'll name our data frame the same way we've been doing, SDR data. And with the assign arrow, we'll use the read CSV function with here. And then here's where we input and we tell R where to find the file on our computer. So if we look in our panes here and we're looking for that SDR 2023 CSV data file, it's within data. So we'll type data, right? Telling R look into the data file. And then here it is, SDR 2023 data.csv. Type that. Data.csv. And we run this code, we should get SDR data in our environment. So here it is, right? We can click on it. This is the data frame we've been working with throughout the whole course. So this is an option for your final project. The other option was the SIDS data set, or smaller and developing states. So if we wanted to read that in, just because we haven't yet in the course, we could call this one SDR data SIDS. And with the assign arrow, we can use read underscore CSV again, here function, and then in quotes, we'll use data, right? Because it's in the data folder. But we'll use one more folder because it's in a subfolder within the data folder. It's in this SDR for SIDS. So we'll do SDR for SIDS. And here is the data frame. So SIDS, SDR. So we'll put a slash. SIDS, SDR 2023 data.csv. And when we plug this in, we should be able to run the code. And now we have our SIDS SDR 2023 data set. So much smaller data set, but perfectly viable for you to use in your final project. And this is one thing that we haven't covered, right? Because all of these lines of code have been written in for you, so you haven't had to edit them in any of the assignments or anything. But it's always good in the future when you're a data scientist to know these tips and tricks. Okay, someone gives you a data frame, you download it, you put it in a folder on your computer, and then you have to tell R where it is, where that file is, what folder it's in on your computer. And the best method that I know how to make this process really seamless and make it reproducible is by starting an R project, creating a data folder like this, and putting your data within that data folder. And then when you share your code, you could use the read CSV function. You can use here, which says start within this R project. And then you can use data SDR 2023.csv, right? And tell R the name of the data frame. So that's just reading in data, I think in the simplest, most reproducible way. Sometimes you'll see like really long file path names like read CSV, and then you'll see users, Connor, documents, all that kind of stuff. That makes things really tricky because if I share my code with you, you don't have a Connor folder, right? Or a user's Connor documents, your data might be somewhere else. So that makes you have to change some of the code, making it not reproducible. But as long as you use GitHub the way we have been, and you open up an R project and put your data in this folder, the code will run seamlessly for anyone that you share it with, which is pretty nice. So I just wanted to touch on that since that hasn't been a part of the course and is part of being a data scientist, definitely. And now we'll go into what you'll do next. So we'll clean the names maybe of our data, or the column names. We'll do another code chunk. We'll use that janitor package. So let's focus on the SIDS data for now. And we'll overwrite the data frame, right? Because we're not making a huge change. We're just cleaning up column names. So SDR data SIDS. We'll use that pipe function and then just clean. And we'll show names. Sorry, I misspoke. It's the pipe operator. And then the clean names function. When we do that in SDR data SIDS, we have these nice column names that are all lowercase and separated by underscores. From there, you should be ready to do any analysis that you'd like. So again, if you're using SDR data, right, you just have SDR data here, or whatever name you choose to give the data frame that you read in. And then from there, you'll do your analysis. You'll write the text supporting each data visualization. So maybe we'll run and just do one before we knit and show what the output looks like. So let's say maybe we want to look at SDR data SIDS, and maybe we're interested in either goal 2 or 3, or I like looking into maybe goal 7. I like this SDG 7 electricity access. And again, we have our normalized scores, the N underscore SDG 7 electricity access, and then we have just the actual measurement itself, so the percentage of the population access to electricity. So let's choose this one. Let's just make a quick histogram. So to do that, let's say, look at histogram of SDG 7 electricity access data. And again, we'll open a new code chunk. We can use our ggplot function, right? We could specify our data is SDR data SIDS. We can open up the aesthetic function, and since this is a histogram, we only need an x-axis, so we could do x equals, and we'll make sure we know exactly what we want. So it's SDG7 underscore elec app, SDG7 underscore elec app. Then we'll do a plus, and geom underscore histogram. Perfect. We plot this. this is what it looks like, right? So a lot of countries with high electricity access between 90 and 100, even close, very close to 100, maybe 97. But some countries, right, these boxes, some number of countries have very low electricity access, right? So just over 30%, 50, under 70. So again, the majority of SIDS, almost 100% electricity access for their populations, but some that still have some challenges in that specific SDG indicator. And the last thing we'll do is knit this, the knit button. And here's what that looks like. So we have the data that we read in, our code is in these gray boxes. And then we have our pictures here. So again, this is what you'll be using for your final Zoom. I mentioned in the beginning of the video, right, we don't want these kinds of labels like SDG 7, ELEC. So to do that, right, we could change the lab function or use the labs function and do our X equals, right, and the proper name. We could add a nice theme to this with theme underscore, right? So I want you to go crazy with this and customize your visualizations in the way you want. But we definitely don't want the generic SDG 7 electricity access and count, right? We want to say the full nice names and nice English to make these plots as presentable and as easy to read as possible. Cool. So I'll just delete this little bit. And then the last trick, if you noticed when we knitted, sometimes in the PDF, like you'll get these messages. And if you're a little particular, maybe like myself, you'll want to get those out of your final PDF report. So you can do things like this. There's a few tricks. Like you can write messages or message equals false. When you knit this, the message will go away for that top one, right? If I wanted this message to go away, I'd have to write it in this next code chunk. Let's look again. And then we have normal text here. If you notice, this is as simple as possible, right? But if we wanted maybe some sections within read-in data, we could, just as an example, we could put read-in data with some hashtags to make it bigger. And then if you wanted to describe it, so this is SDR 2023 data. Then if you wanted to put some bullet points, maybe just something to describe it, like this is from sustainability development for. You could even link it, right? So there's some tricks in this markdown language where if we wanted to link something like this, you could put it in brackets. And then really quickly, we can look at SDR 2023. And again, this isn't necessary or mandatory, but I think it's a nice thing to do if you have resources that you want to share. So here it is. Here's the link. We can go and put it into our studio in parentheses right after those brackets. When we knit now, you'll notice a few differences. So this is bigger. This is now a heading. This is the SDR 2023 data, and then we have it linked here so someone could go check out the development report themselves with a bullet point, and that's what this dash did here. So this is the markdown language. If you Google it and check it out, there's all sorts of tips and tricks to making your knitted PDF look really nice and presentable, just like the way they are on the website. So I encourage you to do that in some of the finer tweaking of your PDF. I think it's good practice. And it makes an audience really appreciate the work that you did when it's in that nice, clean format. Fantastic. So that is everything from our final project guide. I showed you how to write this code, how to make a new R Markdown. If we go into RStudio one last time, the way you would submit this, right, is going to the Git pane and pushing. And that would be your final code submission. And then once you push that code, if you wanted to share screen with Zoom, so I just open up a new meeting on Zoom. So open up the Zoom app, open up a new meeting, and then just record. There's a record tool in Zoom, and that's how you just open up this knitted R Markdown. Sorry, I'll knit it one more time. You have it. This is where you would start and say, my name's Connor Flynn. This is my final project for the UN SDG Analytics in R certificate. And then go right through and say, this is the data I used. I decided to make a histogram, electricity access. Here's what it looks like. Again, you'll have your 8 sentences supporting each visualization to tell the story. But that'll be what your final project looks like. Just a screen recorded version, just like you're seeing now, going through a knitted R Markdown like this. It's just the way Victoria and I have been doing it. And then with your permission, we'll of course maybe share some of those videos. Maybe we'll put them on the website because we'll be really proud of the work you've been able to do and we'll want to showcase it. So that is everything. We encourage you to, make maps, do statistics, try to use some machine learning. Definitely don't be scared of being wrong. This is a course that's meant to embrace data science and think about these concepts in a fun way. So don't be scared to be wrong, or there is really no way to be wrong in some of these things, right? You're just presenting data in different ways through different lenses and doing different analyses. So be creative, ask questions. Don't be afraid to try. And I would just say, enjoy the process and enjoy asking the questions and using the new skills that you've gained in the course. So thanks again. I encourage you to come to office hours. It'll be really neat getting to see the development of some of your projects as they go. There should be 4 different sessions over those 2 weeks. So 8 hours of office hours that we're here to help you in any way that you need. So thanks again and good luck.